Hello and welcome to another episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. My name is Lisa Huang, Co-Executive Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design.
Hello everyone, I'm Julia Donatello, Design Competitions and Event Manager at AIGA.
In this 11th season of our podcast, we are exploring the theme of Eyes on Design, which is also the overarching theme of AIGA's programming this year, which includes this podcast and more, which we'll be sharing shortly. This season's theme is inspired by the legacy of the acclaimed AIGA Eye on Design publication, which ran from 2015 to 2022, challenging our community to look deeper, connect broadly, and think further about design. We're dedicating this season to fostering a new era of discourse by critically analyzing the present, bridging disciplinary divides, and boldly facing the future. The three I's include the connecting eye, which is connecting design with other disciplines like technology, science, art, and culture.
The critical eye, we seek to analyze thoughtful critique and design commentary using the lenses that check and analyze a broader cultural and social landscape.
And finally, the future eye, the third eye, is about keeping tabs on the evolving landscape of design practice, emerging trends and technologies, including AI, VR, AR, and all sorts of other stuff as we design the future together. Our guest this episode is Lisa Gralnek, who is both the Managing Director of IF Design USA and the Global Head of Sustainability and Impact at IF Design. She also hosts the Future of XYZ podcast. Lisa, it's so great to have you on the show.
Lishan, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just dive right into a bit of your story, how you got to where you are today. You had an interesting journey. You studied political science and French in undergrad. I'm also a poli-sci major myself.
Cool.
And then you later earned an MBA. So how did design enter your life with this start?
Not to belabor like the history, but I think it's material for where I've landed.
Yeah.
Design has always been forefront to me. I grew up in a household that was very focus on interiors, landscape, architecture, and contemporary art. So that was really a big part of my growing up, as was the natural environment. So I really think about sustainability also, and design have kind of been the lenses, weirdly, through which I've probably experienced the world my whole life. And when I went off I grew up in Southern California, but when I went to college on the East Coast, because I had spent my summers on the East Coast in that same place or a similar place, I studied political science because we had also been very, very news-centric at my house and cultural affairs and things. So political science became an obvious one to me because I thought I'd do psychology or anthropology. But in the end, I got really hooked on the poli-sci and the lens of really thinking about like post-colonialism and identity politics. I also had the luxury, I call it, of being considered like the best dressed on campus, which was really not that complicated. In the 90s in rural Maine, when you had come from a high school that was double the size in Southern California. But I really loved clothing as an expression of identity. And I ended up writing my college thesis after junior year abroad and some stints in advertising, internships in advertising in various cities around the world. I actually wrote my thesis on self versus others. So it was an identity politics visioned thesis. I really wrote my thesis on life. But because I'm making this really long-winded, I actually graduated. And the day I graduated, had decided I was moving back to Paris. And my boyfriend at the time said to me, that's lovely. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I bought this visa. And, I didn't know anything. So I thought that I could actually get a job. But it turns out I probably for 2 months could have like directed traffic on a tour bus. But instead I got to Paris and I said to him that day, and it made it real. I said, I'm going to work in fashion. And I ended up actually spending the next almost 9 years in the fashion world. And really in the intersection of the business and the creative, doing kind of both roles. And that's where I find myself still.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Lisa, now shifting a little bit of the role that you have at IF Design at the moment. So we know that you oversee IF Design Award, which receives more than 10,000 entries from around 70 countries every year. From a person that also manages design competitions from AIGA, and one of them that is actually a very traditional, more than 100 years old competition, the scale that IF Design Award reaches is incredible. So I'm very curious to hear a little bit of the backstage of the production. So how is it to receive so many entries? How does it work to choose the, I know there are, I think, more than 90 categories on something on those lines.
You did your research well, Julia.
Yeah, I know there are disciplines and the categories, and how do you choose the jury to evaluate all that? How long does it take, the evaluation? If you can share a little bit of the backstage, we would love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you nailed it. So IF Design has been around since 1953. In the post-war period, as the Brits were in charge of kind of Northern Europe and were looking to rebuild Northern Germany and kind of moving north, they named Hanover, Germany as the location for what they became the Hanover Messe, which is a convention. And it was for industrial design. And so we were actually the original award component of the Industrial Design Trade Fair, which was the largest and most prestigious in the world for many, many, many years. It's where, Dieter Ham's at Braun came out of and everything else. So he was one of our original jurors, for instance.
Wow.
And so we're coming up, and he actually was our first Lifetime Achievement Award that we gave 2 years ago and made his final public appearance at age 92 on the award stage.
Wow.
Which was pretty exceptional for everyone in the room, 2,500 people. But yeah, I mean, it's so we started in product design as the discipline, and we've subsequently, as you mentioned, evolved to 93 categories across these 9 disciplines, which product is still definitely the biggest. But under product, you have car and transport design, you have sports, you have lighting, you have now, interconnected ecosystems, you have audio. I mean, babies and kids, I mean, building materials, it goes on and on. Obviously audio and tech and all the things, but we also have packaging design. We have branding and communications design, which is both physical and digital, as well as logos and stuff really in AIGA's wheelhouse. We have service and systems design, which is growing. We have UX, UI, architecture, and interior architecture, as well as concepts across those things that aren't coming to market, which is really fun. I have to say, for architecture and branding, in my favorite categories for that. But you mentioned the jury process. The jury process, and it's really, I think, what differentiates IF from most of the other cross-disciplinary and global awards out there, is the real rigor and objectivity of the process. So it's a 2-step process. So the 10 to 11,000 entries we get are juried individually by subject matter experts in that. This last year, we had 134 jurors in that first online. They take 3.5 days to jury between 300 and 500 entries each across 5 criteria. So classic design crit, idea, form, and function. More kind of business, commercialization, differentiation. And then, and I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, sustainability as of 2 years ago is 20% of the score. So those are equally divided, and they have a 0 to 100 score for each of those criteria. So the overall becomes some factor of 500, right?
Yeah.
Everyone gets their feedback chart so they can see how individual jurors scored them in those 5 criteria, and then also how they compare to their category on average and overall on average. At the end of the preliminary jury, 50%, the top 50% of all entries, regardless of geography, regardless of category, move forward. We don't balance. So if you have really tough jurors in automotive, for instance, who don't score, you might have a lot less automotive in the final jury.
Got it.
People are allowed to update their applications during a short window in between. And we encourage all entries that have a physical sample to send to the final jury hall, which happens either in Berlin or in Hamburg, traditionally. So in Germany. This last year, which just happened in mid-February, our final jury was quite remarkable. We had 500 more physical presentations than we've ever had. So this really shows how people are involved and understand that for the jurors to touch and feel and really play with the things, it's really important. Anything else is presented on a screen, and our jurors sit together for 2.5 days. We bring the jurors together to, it's very confidential. There's no press, and they discuss and they look at their starting scores from the preliminary jury, and then they discuss it together. So it's much more group oriented. And from that, we choose a third as winners, and we choose, and then we choose 75 gold winners, which is really the most prestigious high end aspect of the IF Design Award. And our jurors are, global heads of design, chief design officers for companies like Samsung, Hyundai, Sony, Mattel. Plus young, not necessarily big corporate leaders of Harman, the audio company, architects, the president of the International Interior Design Association. I can't speak. And CEOs as well as independent architects. So it's a really robust and very, very senior group that really makes it quite extraordinary when they all come together and share 2.5 days in person, not only looking at what's considered the best of design, but also really, discussing where the future is heading, which of course is the conversations I like, and where there's cross-disciplinary things and what kind of macro trends we're all seeing. And it's quite extraordinary. And then we have a big party for the winners in Berlin at the end of April.
Oh, nice. Okay. Wow. Very, very cool. Amazing. So as you just mentioned here that I think I also heard some other podcast interviews from you, and you mentioned that you consider yourself a futurist. So looking back, how do you think IF Design Awards has made it, it continued being a relevant award, and how do you see the future of it?
I love this question. Look, I do consider myself a futurist. I find that it's very funny as a futurist that the words that I use seem to somehow get completely bastardized in some period of 2 to 5 years from the time I put something on my LinkedIn profile. I can no longer say it, authentic brand builder, went the way of 15 years ago. Then it was strategist. No one was calling themselves a strategist. Then it went everywhere. And now it's futurist. I don't say it anymore because everyone's a futurist. But also because, I think what it really means, all of those things actually mean the same thing to me, which is, you're really kind of just very curious in life and reading the tea leaves, if you will, and looking ahead and connecting the dots. And I think, IF, when I came on board nearly 3 years ago now to open the first ever North American subsidiary, I had never heard of IF. And I've been in and around the design world for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of what we're coming up against is in the US, especially North American market, IF is not well known. Mm-hmm. In certain countries in Germany, in Europe, including Germany, obviously our headquarters, and certainly in certain industries, we are extremely well known. We are also extremely well known in the Far East. So Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, also Turkey, Brazil, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, places where we've had a presence now for over 20 years. We're very well known and considered the most prestigious design award. So what we have to offer in the US excites me as a futurist because we have a long legacy, which is what makes it meaningful. We've retained our relevance. We're only continuing to grow since the pandemic, which is quite remarkable. And what we're hearing in the US over and over again is how relevant the award is. But now we also just introduced the Academy, which is executive leadership for design leaders. And that's hopefully I'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit. But that really ties to the mission of IF Design, which is a nonprofit foundation, to really help designers and the design industry at large kind of find its relevance, keep its relevance. So I think we see ourselves as partners and facilitators and a platform and just really a active member of the design community globally, not as anything more or less than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. And now I'm curious, you briefly mentioned that I think 2 years ago, there was a change in the criteria, in the evaluation process of all of the categories, if I'm not mistaken, and sustainability is now represents 20% of the evaluation. Can you elaborate a little bit of how was the shift? How has it changed? If you have seen already some type of change in the entries that have folks who have submitted new entries, a little bit of the background also of this shift.
I love that you asked about sustainability. I love talking about it. When I came on, it was very obvious to me that this social and environmental aspect was a very, very important piece of everything for me. I'd mentioned before business school. I went to business school after fashion specifically to get into sustainability and luxury, and unfortunately graduated into the financial collapse of '08 with a whole bunch of school debt. And that was not the conversation that anyone, much less the luxury sector, was having. And I've really been working on the sustainability side behind the scenes, not maybe explicitly, but in each of my roles. And so if I was going to take this role with IF, it meant a lot to me that if we're going to be this authority and partner to the design community, we were going to need to take on sustainability. And fortunately, the CEO, who had come on about a year before me, after the prior CEO had been there for almost 30 years, he also felt very strongly about this, as did the award director who had been there for about 30 years. So this was really exciting collaboration. And we pretty quickly took what were the 5 criteria I mentioned before. The 5th one previously had been impact, and impact was kind of confusing because it was both commercial impact as well as social and environmental. And so we just renamed it sustainability, and we pushed the kind of leading question of commercial impact into differentiation, and then we focused sustainability. And we've built out a working team of outside experts who consult with us, if you will, if you call them that. They consult with me and our team on making sure that the application makes sense from the questions and the criteria and the accreditations we're asking about, and really getting to the biggest impact, which is different, for instance, in cars or audio or packaging or architecture. So really trying to hone in on, by category, what is most important. But also then advising the jurors, in their jurying process, not as jurors, but as expert advisors on the sustainability topic. So we've really invested heavily on this. I'm really proud of the work we're doing. We just, as I mentioned, came out of the final jury, and we had one expert per jury chairperson, which really has helped accelerate understanding acceptance. And we look at this as a journey that we're helping our participants become more aware of the topic and asking more, but also our jurors. And yeah, you asked, are we seeing a difference? The answer is the quality of the responses is getting better. We're learning about what we can ask without overwhelming the person filling out the application. And we always said we're rewarding good, not punishing bad. And that's really to try to help, rising tides lift all ships. And that's really our attitude is let's bring people along to make things better. And I think we're seeing that all the time. And we have 4 gold winners this year that were randomly selected by our sustainability experts, as well as best in show just internally on the sustainability topic. And we got our first ever 100 score in sustainability, which was incredible. So, these are really exciting times, and we're just continuing to push and move forward.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up a bit on the sustainability thread, and then also come back to this IF Design Academy, which is how we first connected, Lisa.
Exactly.
So in previous media that you've been on, you've talked about returning to the repairable, the reusable, and updatable in design, and also shifting from short-term to long-term value. And so there's a lot of these different ways of looking at sustainability, as you've mentioned. So how do you see companies and designers doing that?
I think it's going to intersect nicely, at least, Sean, probably with the talk of the academy.
Yeah.
I think there's real challenge. I mean, there are a lot of headwinds, as we know, right? Just in terms of accepting sustainability, moving forward. understanding what it is. I think a lot of products are very complex, and therefore it's hard to know the difference. There are a lot of materials that are nebulous. Every market is different in terms of, what we can single stream, recycle in New York City is different than in Providence, Rhode Island, or Los Angeles, right? Mm-hmm. So these are really interesting aspects. One of the partners we've brought into this, what we call the Sustainability Working Group, has been some of the design leads from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one of my favorite organizations I've been involved with for a very long time, who are focused on kind of transitioning to the circular economy. And all of those words that you just used, repairability, reuse, recycle, et cetera, are parts of the 8-step R ladder, which we ask people about in our application. We don't call it the R ladder. We don't ask about circularity. We ask, Is it repairable? Is it recyclable? Is it reusable? Right? Is it refusable? We don't ask that, because then they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't have built it. But that's really, kind of how we're leading, if you will, leading the witness to try to understand and embed. We are seeing this last year, very candidly, that people check a lot of boxes. And then when you actually get into, where they get to write something about it, it's not always justified. And it's not conscious greenwashing. I think that there's a real lack of understanding. And again, someone filling out the application may not have full purview. But if you say that I'm going to use headphones as an example, right, are repairable, you have both designers who understand what that is, because they're experts in audio design of the best quality in the world. And then you have a sustainability expert in this topic, right? And so you're able to look at this headphone and say, well, they say it's repairable, except that none of these pieces seem to come apart. It's molded plastic with foam. And again, we reward good, we don't punish bad. So that doesn't mean that they get knocked down. It just means that they don't get recognized, but their materiality might actually be superior. So it's all a discussion, but it really invokes these conversations that are really meaningful. And so what we're seeing is our jurors get more aware. And because our jurors oftentimes, they can't jury their own projects. That's very clear cut, right? Someone from Samsung steps away if a Samsung is on the table. And there's a very clear process for that. But if they become aware of, oh, wow, we said this, but that's actually not true. Oh, well, there's another way of doing it. That helps everyone, because when the leaders in market and the people who are applying for IFs, they're not all big companies, right? They're like leading design studios. They're young designers starting out and trying to make their mark. The more that they all can feel invested in these answers to these questions, the hope is, of course, that, they become more informed, and then it trickles out into the marketplace, and then it becomes more adopted by consumers. And that's the role we hopefully get to play. Without being too naive about the impact.
I think that's actually a really good segue to talking about IF Design Academy. But just to synthesize a little bit of what you've been saying, Lisa, it's almost like having these criteria of sustainability as part of the application form when people submit is both, there's like a pedagogical value to those designers as well as a pedagogical value to the jurors, saying like, oh, wow, this is something that I'm being asked to evaluate on, right? And you're like setting a standard in that sense, and people can go away and say like, okay, how do we learn more about this for next time around?
I think it's a great summary, Lishan. And the only thing I'll add to it, if you guys don't mind, to the best of our knowledge, we are the only cross-disciplinary or global design award that now has embedded sustainability fully into the primary jurying criteria of an award across everything and not calling it out separately. So that was really important to us in the work we're doing and the decision making. And I think that's really where we're seeing the difference. If we called it out separately, it wouldn't have the same impact, right? Because now we're demanding that, the Ferrari, right, who is there, they better explain, like, what are they doing,
Totally. Yeah. So we've talked about like using these award criteria as a form of educating designers and jurors. But IF Design has also created programming that's explicitly educational. And in fact, as I mentioned, we met last year in New York City at a launch event for the IF Design Academy. You all have launched with initially 5 courses, I believe, on design leadership. So can you tell us more about that move into education as like an explicit space that IF is taking?
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this. I think coming into a new market, I mean, I say new, Apple has won more IF Design Awards than any other company in the world. There are a lot of companies in the US who have already participated in the IF Design Award. It's just mostly product and just not very well known as a brand. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's one thing to try to convince people to apply for a design award that doesn't have brand recognition and that costs in the end close to 3,000 euros if you win. But it's a whole other to say, well, actually, we're a design institute. We're a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Our mission of the foundation that owns us at 100% shareholder, right, is in fact the future of design in terms of making and serving the world, making it better, serving the world, solving the world's biggest problems. And it's a design. It's a design institute focused on research and education on this topic. And so I can talk about the IF Design Award. I can talk about our content, you know, which we put out an annual trend report, which is big macro trends and very robust. We put out an online magazine. We support the podcast now, Future of XYZ. That's part of Sandow's Surround Podcast Network as well. And we have 2 other awards, which is like the Social Impact Prize and the Student Award, which get about 15,000 entries across the 2 every year across 130 countries and support or solve for one or more of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. And those are free to enter, and we give 150,000 euros of prize money away. Wow. So we have a really big mission. But that's all great. They're all awards and content.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited that the Academy launched last September when you and I met, because I think as someone who's been at the intersection of business and design my whole career, that designers really do themselves a disservice because they don't speak the language of business. Yeah. And historically, it's kind of been okay, but it's increasingly not because the world is run by money. And frankly, the business, I mean, certainly coming from an MBA, like the business people don't really care what the designers think, unless they're a certain kind of business leader, right? Who has that empathy, that creative mind. And I think that there are 2 different sides of the brain that are used. And increasingly, for the world to be better, we need design to be better, and we need it to be elevated. And so when we think about why we launched the IF Design Academy, it's in order, again, the primary mission is to support the international design community. And the way to do that is to ensure that designers of all levels are better educated, not in design. They're educated in design, but in how about things like, you know, personal development, personal growth, you know, how to be a better leader? How do you develop your leadership identity? How do you speak the language of business, right? Like increase your business fluency. Like that one is to me like super passionate. How do you operationalize and scale design? You know, how do you build an internal design team at scale if that's what you're being tasked with? You know, and then how do you lead with insight towards the future, whether that's about AI, whether that's about other emerging techs, and how can we support designers from around the world in getting these skills in short order so that they're better positioned to be able to have the conversations that actually matter today, which really increasingly are conversations about, you know, cost center, is this necessary? You know, why do that? And we don't want design to be relegated to those terms. We want design to be, you know, forefront at the table and for designers to be able to advocate for design in themselves.
Totally. Yeah, you know, that's something that comes up a lot here at AIGA. We have this longtime partnership with the Yale School of Management called Business Perspectives for Creative Leaders. And one of the things when we talk about that program is, you know, it's meant for like mid-career to fairly senior creative leaders, is that the skills that help designers get to where they are into leadership positions, like that gets you so far. But then there's this other stuff, as you were mentioning, Lisa, about like leadership or understanding systems when it comes to sustainability that is not necessarily taught in design school, or maybe you don't need that until you reach a certain stage of your career, right? And so this long learning and having different options of finding what's right for you and is modular, without having to everybody go back to school for a degree is so important.
Completely. And I mean, it's so interesting because what you just said is what I hear a lot, what we've been hearing a lot, which is you get to a certain stage in your career and what got you there is not what is going to make you successful going forward.
Totally. And then you are also dipping into AI stuff in your curriculum as well. So leading AI strategy and design, I believe, is one of the upcoming topics for the Academy. Can you give us a teaser for that?
Totally. I'm so excited about this one. I'm excited about it for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm excited because it's truly for anyone. And frankly, it's for design leaders, but I'm like, I don't think you have to be a design leader to want to take this class, right? I think you could be a business person who wants to understand how AI can be used in design, not to cost cut, not to get rid of jobs. Please give me a break. To actually really be used well and effectively because it's coming for all of us, et cetera. And what are the tools? What are the structures? So I'm really excited for that reason, but I'm also really excited because it's a different format than all the other courses we're testing. It's only week long instead of a 7-week, multi-touch point course, which is also phenomenal with these, the former head of design at IBM and all sorts of, really amazing people who are teaching.
Yeah.
This is a 1-week sprint. It's also with an amazing leader. His name's Tay Bannerman. He's a former partner and head of design at McKinsey. He's an AI, I hate the word guru, so I won't say it, but AI expert. He actually was on the podcast right before Halloween. We did a really spooky episode on the future of being replaced. Because he's wants to talk about why AI is not going to replace you. So we did a future of being replaced. It's going to happen in June. It's a 1-week course. It's called AI Strategy for Design Leaders. And it's really about how do design leaders make confident decisions about AI. And it's for leaders who need to evaluate AI opportunities, understand their organizational readiness, which is, is it ready for adoption? Is it not?
Yeah.
And speak really, most importantly, credibly about AI in any room. So it's going to be awesome. I would say it's probably going to sell out really fast. And so people can go to, sorry for the shameless plug, ifdesign-academy.com to check that out and register as soon as registration's open, which I can't tell you when that is, but it will be soon if it hasn't already opened.
Sounds like a great summer school kind of experience for creative leaders.
I think so. And it's all online. So no one has to displace themselves to get to a class.
So Lisa, in your Fast Company piece called "Where Are All the Designers?", you mentioned that designers are still being underrepresented in the strategic decision making, and a lot in the C-suite teams, they're lacking designers. Do you feel that the companies couple decades ago have embraced the design thinking methods and framework, mostly democratized by IDEO and so on. And then they drift back to the old models. Did you feel this shift to everyone adapting and understanding and valuing design as a discipline and as a professional? And then now kind of going back to old models or not? How do you see this change?
It's a big, big question, Julia. I'm not sure that I am as qualified here to answer, such a big question, but I'll share my perspective, which is, I think you use IDEO as the example. They kind of democratize this idea of design thinking. And about 3 years ago, I had an interview with someone who was at RISD, is now at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And the topic of the conversation ended up being the future of complexity. Mm-hmm. But the conversation that was joking was, should it be the future of design thinking? And his response was, design thinking's dead. And he wasn't the only one, right, who feels that way. Mm-hmm. And this is a designer, of course, and an educator and an independent creative. And I think what's happened is, as always, the bottom line rules out or rules, and wins out or rules. I think from my own experiences, very candidly, money has always been the driver. And there was a moment in there when Apple was surging, when Steve Jobs came back in, when he had just come out of a very successful run at Pixar and came back into Apple, and it was all the rage. I mean, valuations were off the charts, stock prices and dividends were soaring, consumer loyalty was everywhere. And you say, like, this is all about design. And it was. That's actually not changed. It's just the perception and the way people talk about it and the appetite. Steve Jobs got it, right? Like, he understood that you create an integrated ecosystem. And not only is that going to increase your sales, but it's going to build loyalty because it all works better, and, right? I mean, there are also some downsides that I'm not going to get into. Tesla tried to do the same thing when they started building out, like their electric grid across the country and across the world, except that it wasn't with the same attitude of consumer first. It was for the money. It was for stickiness, and it didn't work, right? So I think what's happening right now is that there is a real sour taste in people's mouth that design thinking failed, that design is somehow expensive and frivolous. I can't speak
frivolous,
to that.
I think is the word.
Frivolous,
yeah.
Right? Trivial and frivolous mixed into one word. That was where I was going with that. That's cute. But yeah, I think that's really what's happened. And I don't think that's true. And so when you think about the underrepresentation of designers in the C-suite or any strategic decision-making table or room, there's a problem. This is true at the policy level too, when you think about it, right? At the policy level, you don't have design thinkers. There are no solutions being formed. There are tactics and short-termism. Fundamentally, design is everything. I mean, Lord Norman Foster said it. He was our second Lifetime Achievement Award last year. And he said, design is everything and everywhere. We all believe this. I just watched the film Modernist Inc. It was a 2023 movie about Elliot Noyes, who was one of the Harvard Five and one of the amazing designers, cross-disciplinary designers of the world, who created the IBM logo plus all sorts of the IBM products, Mobil Oil. I mean, you go on, and their logos are still in place, right? Since the 50s and 60s. And they created an identity that connected consumers with corporate entities and made them believe in ways that still exist today. Like, design is not frivolous. It is not a cost center. It is not a nice to have. It is how you find solutions, right? Design thinking is problem solving, right? There is no designer who's like, oh yeah, I already know the answer. It's like, well, what was the question, right? That is, and when you're talking about branding, whether you're talking about a book design, whether you're talking about a magazine layout, it doesn't make any difference what you're designing. It could be a whole city. You're getting designers think bigger. They think in systems, and we have to celebrate that because that's what the world needs today, not just on the sustainability front, but on fundamental economics. If we're going to do better and survive. And if we keep just building stuff that's like meant to maximize your quarterly profit, I mean, we're just going to end up in a race to the bottom, which is kind of, a very sad place that I don't think that serves the business people either, ultimately.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a soapbox and a half.
I wanted to build off of that design thinking point. I think design thinking was almost a victim of its own success in a way, in the way that it became like such a buzzword. Like, I was involved in taking these trainings up to the level of like teaching these trainings, in boardrooms to non-designers. And it was great in terms of a learning experience. I think it was sometimes oversold, or it was kind of sold as just a training without actually operationalizing, which we can talk about now, applying to AI as well as sustainability, right? Where it's like, okay, this becomes such a big thing that everyone's talking about. People want to learn about it. They do learn about it. And then there's still that like application step of like, how do you operationalize it? And oftentimes it was just, companies were willing to invest in the design thinking trainings, but not really think about how they change their way of doing business.
Absolutely. And look, I spent time after business school at the Boston Consulting Group in management consulting, right? I mean, that was a strange, hard left pivot in my career. But it gave me insight after having been kind of sequestered in the world of high fashion, luxury, retail, magazines into the big challenges that big companies face at a global level. And I am forever grateful for the experience because of the unique position I had there, which was sitting with some of the senior leadership in the consumer practice and the regional practice, and really getting to see what was best practice for these big companies and what were the challenges that they needed solving. And this was 2008, 2009. So right after, kind of Great Recession timing. And I think what you just said is true. And what that lesson taught me, and then going to Adidas, where I was in charge of some change management, did a lot of change management in my career subsequently. If you lift a rock in any of these big corporations, you think that you're going to just turn over the rock and then you're going to fix what's underneath. And then all of a sudden, it's a nasty visual, but it's true. All the critters go scattering.
Totally.
Right? You lift the rock and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? Because every single one of these companies, and we come back to Elliott Noyes, in the 50s, IBM, it was a transition from father to son taking over. It was a business growth. You were starting to think about mainframe computers being used for mathematical computations at scale, but they were mainframes that were as big as, a Walmart, and that's changed. And so in order to adapt to the times, these companies, I joke, it's like architecture. They started as a center hallway, colonial, and then they built on the neo-revivalist, addition. And then that started collapsing. And so they added a modern wing, and then they added the second story again. And then, it just became something that if you open one door, you kind of have to take it all down. And that's, of course, not viable. And so there's a lot of patching. And of course, in the public markets, you're incentivized only to think in terms of quarters. You are dinged on the public market for capital investments, unless capital expenditures, unless the market deems that worthy of their money, right? And so privately held companies have a lot more opportunity to kind of integrate much more deeply the design thinking if they so choose. And I think that's what you've really seen is it was a victim of its own success. I think business people were like, oh, cool, this is cute with the colored sticky notes all over the walls. But they didn't get that systems are what matter. They're like, we want it solved now, because that short-termism is the way that you are efficient and effective, and cash is king, because that's what you learn in business school. And I know I'm a little cynical, but I think that we really do have these houses or buildings that have been constructed with, kind of completely Frankenstein at this point. And in order to not lift a rock and have a million critters scatter that you have to then fix and put back and figure out, it requires design thinking, but it requires systems thinking and cross-disciplinary, cross-functional, cross-industry, cross-regional, cross-geographic collaboration. Regulation used to help with that. Regulation is no longer really helping with any of it, unfortunately. And so the onus is on the organizations themselves to, I think, re-embrace design thinking for the future. And the design thinking for the future really has to be how do we figure out a system that supports efficiency, productivity, profitability, sustainability, all the abilities, right? Employability, consumer loyalty. So
Lisa, as someone who is interested in the future, you brought a little bit more about the IF Design Academy programs and the AI course that is coming soon. I think in June you mentioned. How do you think the next generation will learn design skills, and how do you think they can balance becoming fluent in AI without compromising their creative and critical thinking?
Oof. Do we have a couple of hours for this one? I think
we have to sign up for that week-long course.
Yeah,
I know.
Exactly.
Well, I think that we need a symposium on the topic of the teaching the youth, because the youth will teach us, as they always do.
Yeah.
But there are two major risks right now, which is the critical thinking, right? The curiosity and the critical thinking, because AI is a tool, right? Yeah. If you believe everything that AI tells you and can't discern the difference, that's no longer critical thinking. Your creativity will die on the spot because you're accepting something that is fact that isn't necessarily. It also, I heard it described by a designer the other day really nicely. Like AI makes everything kind of perfect, kind of flattens everything. But like, where's that human, like, where's the roughness? Like when people used to go to design school, and I'm even old enough for this to have been how people learned in design school. You did models. You like worked with your hands, right? Like you had to build maquettes. Like, you know, one of the biggest architectural firms in the world just recently announced that they're closing their model department, right? Like they're not even building models, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where we learn. I mean, you can't learn if you're not touching it, and people can argue, and they will, right? I mean, the young people listening to this will be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about anymore. Like if they ever thought I did. But I think that there is a tactile piece to learning that's a feedback. It's a visual feedback. And there is scientific evidence over and over that when we engage our five senses together, things stick better. We learn better. The information integrates better. And if we just plug it into a machine and it spits out some version of something that is like a hybrid of what we were thinking, but we accept it at face value without pressure testing or knowing even what questions to ask of it, I think we risk both critical thinking, but also creativity. So how they're going to learn it, you know, they have to want to. They have to recognize that it's something that they might actually have a blind spot to and be willing to listen to their elders, which could be only 5 years older than them, to be honest, at this point, and their teachers, and hopefully get out in the street and roll around in the mud and build a skateboard and smash their lip and like figure out that like the wheels didn't work the way they thought. And, you know, whatever that example is, you know, cut your finger off with an X-Acto knife, like learn what it takes to make things, I think is part of this.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of that, I guess, classic, but maybe going away framework for design education of head, heart, and hands, right? It's like, oh, you got to think critically. You need to have that empathy with your heart, and then the hands of just like the hands-on craft part of it. And I think if we lose that, we're like losing even more of a grip on reality, right? When everything is so mediated through screens and simulations and AI models.
I mean, Lishan, you just said something also. I mean, yes, absolutely on the hands, but also on the heart. If you don't know what's real and you don't question, how do you develop empathy if you're only listening to a machine? Like you need to get out and talk to and listen to and engage with different kinds of perspectives and different experiences in order to develop that empathy, that heart muscle. And it's a core piece of being a great designer.
Yeah, I think for me, the tension that I'm feeling on my end here is mostly like, if you think a couple decades ago, we used to write more with our hands, right? And now it's all typing and we barely use pens anymore. And so as a society, I think there is some collective agreement that we don't need to write with our hands anymore so much, because that's somehow we unlearned it.
They don't teach kids cursive anymore.
Exactly. And so now I'm thinking, like, what are we as a society with all these AI tools that are now, you know, booming? What are we deciding that we are going to unlearn? Because of course there will be some big changes on that, and that's a little bit of my conflict and friction here. On yes, we're going to adjust many things, but what are we deciding to, unlearn in a way?
I love, because there's only so much room, right?
Yeah.
There's only so much time in the day or room in our heads I don't know what the answer is. I think it's a really provocative question, Julia, of like, what are we going to unlearn in order to be able to learn what we need to learn for the future? And I think that cursive or just handwriting in general is an example. And if you played that out, like in terms of like, if people don't need paper anymore, right? Like, I mean, are people going to stop being able to read because they only listen? And like, you know, on and on and on it goes. And like the post office, do you actually need to send things if people aren't like, whatever? I know those are like extrapolations, but they're the first ones that come to mind. It's again, the lift the rock and a million things go scattering. Like, I wonder what we're going to unlearn and then what the ramifications of that are going to be, that in 5, 10, 15, 50, 500 years, we couldn't possibly know.
Yeah.
And that to me is actually a fascinating question and worthy also of its own conversation.
Yeah, I think it definitely deserves like a whole symposium. As we wrap up our time together in this conversation, though, Lisa, we like to end with a few sort of rapid fire questions to get to know more about you and how you think. So the first one is, if there's one thing that you could redesign from scratch, it could be a product, a service, a space, whatever that is, what would it be? And what are some of the changes you would make?
Social media.
Yeah.
Yes.
Social media. I mean, in every way, I would have accountability. I'm just gonna. Can I just stop there? Social media.
Yeah. No, I think that. Yeah. Definitely. And then who is a person, whether a designer or some other kind of professional from the present or from history, who inspires you for not just their work, but like who they are as a person?
I mean, there are so many people on a daily basis who I come across who are inspiring, and throughout history, of course, also. I think that's kind of what keeps us all hopeful. Are the people who just see through or are courageous, who, I don't know, who make a difference. But one of my favorites, not certainly at the top of all, but she always comes to mind, is Madeleine Albright. Mm-hmm. Madeleine Albright, to me, I mean, first of all, she was a former Secretary of State, but she did so much. And, she didn't even start her career until she was in her mid 40s. She'd been a stay-at-home mom. She'd escaped from, kind of Nazi East Germany or Eastern Europe, and came to the States, got educated, became married and mother, and then started her career late. And it comes back to my geeky, like, political science background, but she was a brilliant leader and strategist and critical thinker and frankly, creative, out of the box teacher. I mean, she educated those around her through her heart, her head. And her quote, specifically feminist quote, but there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women, has always been one of my mottos. I think women really need to step up for other women always, not only women, but I just think that's actually, I think there's a special place in hell for people who don't stand up for other people in general, regardless of gender or race or ethnicity or, I don't know, anything else. So that's probably who I'd have to answer.
Love it. And to wrap up, Lisa, we wanted to hear from you, like, if you have anything that has been inspiring you lately. That could be a book, a film, an exhibition, a music, an album that is currently feeding your creative soul.
I mean, I always answer this question. There, I could go on and on and on. I mean, I'm pretty I'm putting lots in my brain all the time. My guests for Future of XYZ, every single one blows my mind. Every participant and juror in the Eye of Design Award. But honestly, my greatest creative inspiration is always nature. I call it my religion. Nature's my religion. Whatever the season, wherever I am, like taking a deep breath of fresh air and seeing a flower or seeing a blade of grass or a tree or a mountain or ocean or a river, whatever. It's just small or big. That's always my creative inspiration.
Love it.
Yeah, what a great way to wrap up this conversation. Lisa Gralnek is the managing director of IF Design USA and the global head of sustainability and impact at IF Design. For all of you listening or watching this, if you're watching it on YouTube, please subscribe and leave us a comment. You can also email us at podcast@aig.org. We'll post links to these references in the show notes. Otherwise, we will see you at a future AIG event or another episode of the show. Until next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.